It's so wonderful to have you all here with us today. We have a really special program, and because it's going to be so jam-packed, I want to try to keep us on schedule. So we're going to start right away now with our devotions. Eleanor?
O thou Lord of wondrous grace, bestow upon us new blessings. Give to us the freshness of the spring. We are saplings which have been placed by thy fingers of thy bounty and have been formed out of the water and clay of thy tender affection. We thirst for the living waters of thy favors and are dependent upon the outpourings of the clouds of thy generosity. Abandon not to itself this grove wherein our hopes aspire, nor withhold therefrom the showers of thy loving kindness. Grant that from the clouds of thy mercy may fall copious rain, so that the trees of our lives may bring forth fruit, and we may attain the cherished desire of our hearts. Abdul Baha.
Oh my God, oh my God, this thy servant hath advanced towards thee, passionately wandering in the desert of thy love, walking in the path of thy service, anticipating thy favors, and hoping for thy bounty, relying upon thy kingdom, intoxicated by the wine of thy gift. Oh my God, increase the fervor of his affection for thee, the constancy of his praise of thee, and the ardor of his love for thee, and the ardor of his love for thee. Oh, verily, thou art the most generous, the Lord of grace abounding. There is no other God but thee, the forgiving, the merciful, forgiving, the merciful. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God.
It's wonderful to see all of you here today. Our presentation today is really special. Khela Baskett is going to be our presenter today. And typically, we have done this program a little bit different. We've had 2 or 3 presenters, but the work she has done, we wanted to really get folks involved with it. And I have to say, I met Khela 2 years ago. Actually, she took the course, the anti-Black racism course, but then we really had a chance to get to know each other, working on a project that would involve youth. And one of the reasons why we sent out the information that said, if you had young people that was in high school or college, to invite them to join us today, because this is something that you can also use in your work with young people. So let me tell you a little bit about Khela. She has studied chemistry and computer science at UC Berkeley. She worked in biotech at the Joint Jeanais Institute and held software engineering and project management roles for academic, government, and industry projects. She's interested in anti-racism education, especially what genetics and evolutionary biology can teach us about the unity of the human family. And so her presentation today on the science of skin color is going to help us with that information. Now, in terms of the way we're going to do this, Khela's going to present. Then we will have an opportunity to go into breakout groups. We have facilitators that will facilitate the discussion there. And then we'll come back and do a very brief report out of special things that might have come up in your conversation, but it will be brief. And then Khela will wrap up. So without further ado, Khela, take it away.
Today's presentation is on the science of skin color. I got interested in this topic when I was doing research on, I wanted to answer the question, what does it mean that race is a social construct and doesn't have any biological, meaning? I never answered that question, but I got distracted by this amazing material I found on the science of skin color, which is really delightful. And I hope it catches you all by surprise and teaches you something you never knew before. Since I'm having trouble sharing, I'm going to read you a quote from the most recent 9-year plan that came out from the House of Justice. The letter dated December 30th describes some qualities of Baha'is and their friends who are trying to work on the goals of this plan. The House of Justice says they, the Baha'is and their friends, champion rationality and science as essential for human progress. Since our talk is on science today, I thought that was notable. And right next, in the next sentence, it says, with the inherent oneness of humanity uppermost in their minds, they view everyone as a potential partner. They are conscious of how the forces of materialism are at work around them, and their eyes are wide open to the many injustices that persist in the world. So our subject matter today touches upon all these points mentioned in the plan letter. So the way we're going to do this, we're going to watch 20 minutes total of video. We're going to break a couple times for some discussion. Once we watch the final video clip, Nikki is going to break us into breakout rooms, and we're going to have discussions in smaller groups for about 20 minutes. Then we're going to come back together, share what we reflected on, and then talk more about the material that we learned from the video. More science at the end before we close. So we want to start here with, maybe Renee can share. Renee, you're going to want to share video number 1. And as soon as number 1 is over, you're going to quickly start number 2.
Brains are gray. Human blood is red. Our bones are off-white. Doesn't matter where you're born or to whom. But human skin is different. Some of us have rich, dark brown skin. Some of us have pinkish white skin. Most of us are somewhere in between. For the longest time, why this variation exists was a real scientific mystery. That opened the door for some to invest this biological trait with moral value, and then use that to justify the suffering of others. But biological traits aren't good or bad. They're features that have evolved because they enhance an organism's odds of surviving and passing on its genes.
Like other animal traits, the sepia rainbow of human skin color evolved through natural selection. Now, thanks to advances in anthropology and genetics, exactly how and why it did is no longer a mystery.
Biological anthropologists like myself spend our lives studying how humans evolved and why we differ from one another physically. Our skin provides one of the most visible markers of human variability. It's something that sets us apart from our closest animal relatives. Under their dark fur, chimpanzees have pale skin, and millions of years ago, that was probably also the case for the primates that were our common ancestors. So where did humanity's range of skin colors come from? From physics, we know that the color of any object comes from the wavelengths of light that it reflects back to an observer's eye. We see leaves as green because they reflect back the wavelengths our eyes see as green. Absorbing the wavelengths we see as other colors like blue or red. In humans, different wavelengths of light are reflected or absorbed by a pigment in the top layer of our skin. That pigment's called melanin. It sits inside what look like tiny grains, the melanosomes, that are produced by cells called melanocytes. Our individual genetic inheritance determines the type of melanin inside our melanosomes. The reddish-yellow pheomelanin is more abundant in lightly pigmented people. More darkly pigmented people have more of the brown-black eumelanin. And the more eumelanin, the darker the skin. Melanin also colors human and animal hair and the feathers of many birds. Interestingly, the wavelengths of light that melanin reflects are far less important biologically than the ones it actually absorbs. And of the ones it absorbs, the ones that are the most important are those that we can't even see. Much of the light given off by the sun is invisible to our eyes. Some of that is what's called ultraviolet radiation, which is highly energetic. So much so, it can actually penetrate living cells. When it does, it can wreak havoc within them. It can even cause mutations in skin cell DNA. What stands between us and that threat is the melanin in our skin.
Melanin is kind of like the sensor and kind of like a guardian molecule, and its main job is protection.
For instance, it protects skin cell DNA by forming what are called supranuclear caps and absorbing UV.
They're like little parasols around the nucleus, and UV cannot penetrate these to go and attack the DNA.
That's just one of the things molecular biologist Zalfa Abdelmalek finds remarkable about melanin. Another is the broad range of benefits it provides a diverse collection of species.
We know that melanin in our vertebrates is important for regulating body temperature. It can also give animals camouflage and allows them to recognize other members of the species to propagate the species.
In humans, one of melanin's functions is clearly to protect cells from UV damage. As we evolved, we lost hair and increased melanin production in our skin. So, is there a connection between the intensity of UV radiation and skin color?
You can all think to yourself the answer to this question while Renee cues the second video.
So, is there a connection between the intensity of UV radiation and skin color?
Hi, Tess.
I first became fascinated with UV and skin color in the 1990s. But as I searched for information about the global distribution of solar UV, I discovered the available data was in fact quite spotty. I began casting a wider net, and almost by accident found exactly the raw data needed to fix that. it hadn't been collected by anyone interested in my questions, but rather by NASA.
Ignition and liftoff.
In the 1980s, concern about the health risk posed by the depletion of UV-blocking atmospheric ozone led NASA to take millions of UV measurements from space. I asked NASA to send me the data, and then asked my geographer husband, George Chaplin, to try to visualize it. It turned out to be a bigger request than I'd realized, but he found a way to turn all those data points into a map that showed for the very first time exactly how UV exposure varies throughout the world.
So this is the map.
Most striking was the clear gradient between the equator and the poles, which was interrupted only in places where altitude increased UV exposure.
This is actually in the Tibetan Plateau.
And persistent cloud cover decreased it.
Congo Basin, so it's full of humidity and moisture, which is blocking the UV.
Solar energy is a fundamental attribute of any environment. And it's a well-established fact that organisms living at different latitudes adapt in some way to their local solar conditions. To see how closely human skin color correlates with UV exposure, I collected skin pigment measurements made by anthropologists studying indigenous peoples. For many years, anthropologists have faced the challenge of how to accurately measure skin color. We now use this little device called a reflectometer. Basically, it sends out light of specific colors and then it measures the amount of light that is reflected back. This tells us what color Tess's skin is, and we can then compare this to people all over the world. George then created a second map using measured skin colors and environmental data. It showed UV intensity does indeed predict skin color. Wherever UV is strong, skin is dark, like it is near the equator or at high altitude. At the poles, the skin of indigenous people is almost always lighter. That suggests that variation in human skin melanin production arose as different populations adapted biologically to different solar conditions around the world.
As we've noted, our early ancestors probably had full body hair covering pale skin, just like other primates. So when did the darker shades of human skin begin to evolve?
DNA sequencing has made it possible to find evidence that can help answer that question. Rick Kittles is a geneticist who's skilled at deciphering such clues.
Whenever a species undergoes some form of selection, some form of natural selection, evidence of that selection is found in the genome. And so as geneticists, we get really excited when we explore the genome for these signatures. One way in which that's done is by sampling worldwide populations and looking throughout the genome at variation and comparing across populations. And it's a very exciting process. I feel like a detective when I go through that process.
One of the many genes that genetic detectives have linked to human pigmentation is called MC1R. Sampling from around the world indicates there's a fair amount of variation in the DNA sequence of that gene, but not from every corner of the globe.
When we look at MC1R within African populations, we don't see a lot of diversity. And the particular allele that they have in those African populations is the one that codes for darker skin. MC1R codes for a protein which is involved in the switch from the production of pheomelanin to eumelanin. And we know pheomelanin is the reddish-yellow pigment, and then the eumelanin is the brown-black pigment.
The absence of MC1R diversity in African populations indicates that, in that part of the world, there is strong negative selection against any alleles that would alter dark skin. And how long has this allele been fixed in African populations? Other genetic studies have calculated that it has been as much as 1.2 million years. Since our species evolved in equatorial Africa, it's reasonable to conclude that by that time, all humans were dark-skinned.
The fossil record supports what we've gleaned from genetic evidence. But here's where we confront what was, for me, the heart of the mystery.
The evolution of dark skin in humans suggests that under strong UV light, that trait provided a survival advantage. So what exactly was that advantage?
All right, here's our first discussion question. Does anyone want to take a stab at why humans, okay, let me set the stage for a second here. We've got humans come from primate ancestors. Our primate ancestors were covered in hair. As we become human, what makes humans different from the primates from a biological standpoint is the larger brains, okay? As our brains get bigger, just like a computer processor, we need to shed heat, right? Our body's too hot and all that hair, so we lose the hair. As soon as we lose the hair, our skin is too pale to survive evolutionarily, and we develop dark skin. We're living in equatorial Africa at this point, evolving into the humans we're going to be today. So the question for the group is, what biological evolutionary force do you think is going to cause this change in our skin color as we become human here?
Come on, you guys. Somebody's got to jump in there. What do you think?
Well, okay, I would say that it protects against cancer, because obviously we saw that the gene can be affected by the ultraviolet light. So we would need to be protected.
Cancer, huh? Okay.
About just
That's
sunburn.
Sunburn, cancer, sunburn that leads to maybe, are we talking about skin cancer here or?
Yeah, skin cancer.
Okay, Renee, video 3A.
The fossil record supports what we've gleaned from genetic evidence. But here's where we confront what was, for me, the heart of the mystery.
The evolution of dark skin in humans suggests that under strong UV light, that trait provided a survival advantage. So what exactly was that advantage? It's certainly true, UV damage to skin cell DNA can lead to cancer, and skin cancer can be fatal. For a long time, that seemed the likeliest explanation, except
Skin cancer generally develops after a person's peak reproductive years. For that reason, though it might cut your life short, it's unlikely to affect your ability to pass on your genes.
All right.
I knew it was a trick question, Kayla. But that makes sense, what she said, yeah.
This is the fun part. Up until maybe a decade and a half ago, this was the leading theory for why we developed black skin. It was because of skin cancer. But if you think about it, historically, when were we having babies? Were we having babies at age 40 like we are now?
No, at puberty, as soon as we got able to have them.
It keeps the temperature low.
Ooh, black body radiation.
It prevents the body from heating up.
That is true. That is true. There's also more to the story that she's going to go into later in the video. So, so it's not skin cancer, even though skin cancer will kill you eventually if you've got pale skin and you're on the equator. It doesn't kill you fast enough for evolution to care if you're having babies at age 16. So it's got to be something else.
How about vitamin D toxicity?
Vitamin D toxicity. I love it.
Maybe it lets your grandparents live and they can pass on a little information. I don't know.
So I'll tell you the mechanism. You still may not or may not guess the
Wait a minute. Frederick has his hand up, and I think Gary was also trying to say something. Gary, did you say something previously?
Yes, I said, what about vitamin D toxicity? And that's all I wanted to say.
Okay. Did you hear him, Kayla?
Oh, yes. So
Okay.
vitamin D is going to come into the story in the future here.
Okay.
Vitamin D, I don't know how much vitamin D you would have to develop in order to get toxicity. That's not the answer that the scientists figured out is the reason.
Okay, let's see what Frederick has to say. Go ahead, Frederick.
Just another alternative view when it comes to, I would think, natural selection. Is this like survival of the fittest? Does it have to do with darker skin and with camouflage from other animals that are hunting?
Ooh, good guess. No one guessed that before. No, but I like the thinking.
I would just say that paler skin, you'd be more apt to be seen by a predator in the jungle, whereas a blacker skin, you may fade into the shadows, the trees. So it's just another alternative view, even though it's wrong, as you pointed out. Thank you.
No, thanks for sharing. Okay, so here's the mechanism. As you can see in my extremely pale skin, you can see some of my veins and arteries there, right? Pale skin lets the sunlight through it enough. It can actually, the UV rays can damage vitamins floating in your blood under your skin. So our skin darkened up to protect vitamins floating in our blood from being broken down by the sunlight. Wow. Yeah. So there's a particular vitamin. So if you think about evolution, evolution cares about quality DNA being passed to the next generation, and of course the parents' ability to then raise the young to survive until their reproductive age. So it's got to do with one of those two things, either producing healthy offspring or allowing them to raise up the children to the next generation. This is a really hard one. So if no one has more ideas, I'll give you the answer in the next video, unless anyone wants to take another stab. Okay, since this is a Baha'i forum, the answer is going to be a B vitamin. And what's our favorite number when we're in a group of Baha'is?
9 or 19.
9? It's going to be vitamin B9 is the answer. All right, Renee, let's see it.
All right.
Skin cancer generally develops after a person's peak reproductive years. For that reason, though it might cut your life short, it's unlikely to affect your ability to pass on your genes.
As I was struggling to conceive of an alternative explanation, I happened to attend a lecture on severe birth defects. That talk was about a research project that had found evidence that certain birth defects are far more common among pregnant women with diets deficient in a B vitamin called folate. Only weeks before, I'd come across a paper that described how strong sunlight breaks down folate circulating in skin blood vessels. Here was a direct link between UV radiation, skin color, and reproductive success. It was a small eureka moment for me. In the years since, we've learned that folate is not only essential for normal embryonic development, it's even needed for healthy sperm production in males.
Folate is biological gold. It is an essential nutrient, and it needs to be protected from UV radiation as it circulates in the blood vessels in the skin. That is what melanin does. I felt I was halfway home on my quest to understand human skin color variation. But a big question remained. Why aren't we all dark-skinned?
All right. This is the opposite question. And I think Gary is going to drive us home here. So he gave the right answer in a different form earlier. Why aren't we all dark skinned? What does pale skin accomplish that dark skin doesn't, especially when you have low UV light?
Makes more vitamin D.
Yes. And why don't you need to make vitamin D at the equator?
Well, actually, you do make vitamin D, but there's so much more UV at the equator.
Exactly. All right, last video, Renee.
You're so excited, Kayla. I love it.
Why aren't we all dark-skinned? It turns out there's another side to our relationship with UV light. UV light is not all bad. In fact, the small portion of it known as UVB is critical for the synthesis in our bodies of vitamin D, a process that starts in the skin. Without vitamin D, humans cannot absorb calcium from our diet to build our bones and for a healthy immune system. Back when all our ancestors lived close to the equator, there was no problem getting enough UVB through dark skin to make the vitamin D needed. But then some populations started moving north, where the UV striking Earth's surface is much weaker. In northern latitudes, dark skin makes it hard to produce the vitamin D that human bodies really need. The consequences of vitamin D deficiency include rickets, a bone development disease that can cripple the young. In higher latitudes with less UV, the selective pressure on MC1R that produced dark skin in our ancient ancestors began to abate.
When we look at the early movement out of Africa, when that constraint was relaxed, we then see a plethora of variation.
In European and Asian populations, geneticists have discovered greater variation in the MC1R gene, but less variation in several other genes, ones associated with lighter skin types.
Different environments led to other genes being selected for and being important for those populations in terms of skin color.
Selection for light skin gene variants occurred multiple times in different groups around the world, some of it in just the last 10,000 years. Support for the idea that the UV vitamin D connection helped drive the evolution of paler skin comes from the fact that indigenous peoples with diets rich in this essential vitamin have dark pigmentation. The tension between these two aspects of our biological inheritance, on the one hand, the need to protect ourselves from most ultraviolet radiation, and on the other, the need to use some ultraviolet radiation for our own benefit. These forces drove the evolution of the wonderful variation in human skin color that we see around us today. It's the legacy of an evolutionary balancing act necessitated by the different environmental conditions people have faced around the globe. The thing is, where once human migrations took many generations, we now move about the planet at the speed of sound. That means increasing numbers of us have pigmentation that's not a good match with where we live.
People with fair skin and red hair, your phenotype is telling you you have a high risk of skin cancer if you're out in the sun. If you're a dark-skinned individual living, for example, in Scandinavia or in Minnesota, you're not going to have optimal exposure to UV for optimal vitamin D synthesis, and you need to take supplements.
We now know that we need to make cultural adaptations like these to stay healthy, but that's not all we've learned. With the knowledge we now have about evolution, we also know that skin color is a flexible trait that has changed through time as various groups of people moved to sunny or less sunny parts of the world. And we know that skin color is inherited independently of other traits and is not associated with other aspects of a person's appearance or behavior. Skin color is a product of evolution, and should never have been judged as something good or bad. We are a very clever and adaptable species, and we are one under the sun.
All right, before we break out into groups, I just want to drive a few points home here. So the video went over that all humans are from Africa. We all have African ancestry. In fact, since the birth of the Homo sapiens species, which happened 300,000 years ago, 200,000 of that 300,000, 2/3 of that time, all human beings were in Africa. We only left Africa 70 to 80,000 years ago, well into the last third of our human existence. So all of our ancestry is Black. To be human, for the first 200,000 years of humanity's existence, meant to be Black. So this whole skin color variation is a story relatively new to humanity. So we're going to break out into groups, and when we come back, we'll talk more about all the science we learned and what we reflect on in our groups.
Thank you, Khela. We're going to be in our breakout groups for about 20 minutes, and then we'll come back together.